We are here to discuss communications, specifically in the realm of sailing and boating, as opposed to all the other possible contexts. I am Mia McCroskey. I am a skipper with the Sailing Club and the recently former Commodore. And I've been with the club for a lot of years. I don't quite know, probably going on 18 years, something like that. And I've given this presentation before for on-land training, but we wanted to repeat it this time specifically to record it, but also obviously because it is useful information and doesn't hurt to have refreshed knowledge. So communication, let me go back. Be sincere, be brief, be seated. That's me. We're going to cover onboard communications, which is all about just talking to each other, VHF radio stuff, what to do in emergencies, use of cell phones, use of the internet, and use of satellites. And nothing is so simple that it cannot be misunderstood. All right, I'll stop reading the quotes. But they are worth reading, so take a look at them. So when we're on a sailboat, everyone knows this. It's hard to hear each other unless we're all sitting closely together, especially underway, that's the scenario, unless we're all like in the cockpit. And even then, very often, if you're steering, you're at the helm, you often cannot hear the person who's standing up by the companionway. It's, the conditions can really make it difficult. So always when you are speaking to someone and you're not just, gossiping or chattering, but actually need the information to get to that person, look at them when you're talking to them. It happens all the time. Somebody is looking ahead at, the crab pot that's up ahead of us and is saying, there's a crab pot up there at 1 o'clock, except that the person steering the boat can't hear them. You got to turn around and talk to the person steering the boat. Especially if you're the person dealing with the anchor and you're trying to get a message to the person at the helm. And if you're the person who's being spoken to, acknowledge it. It made me think of all the cooking shows in the kitchen. The answer is always heard. If you hear what is said to you, say, understood, acknowledged, heard, yes, chef, whatever is appropriate in the context of the social situation, to be sure that it's clear that the message you were given is heard by you. Maybe not understood, but at least is heard. Anchoring specifically, we all know it's not great to yell from the bow to the stern. We often try to put somebody in the middle, somebody by the mast or just in front of the dodger on the boat who pays attention to what's being said up on the bow and relates that to the person at the helm. It's really handy to have that. We really only need one person doing that. So if you're not the one assigned to do that, don't do it too, because it's just distracting to have 3 people telling the person on the helm, they said neutral, they said neutral, they said neutral. One person do it consistently, do it well. Hand signals, that's what I like this gift for. It's very useful to use hand signals so that if you don't have someone to be an intermediary, or even if you do, hand signals that I use when I remember to brief the crew on it are a fist means neutral. Oh, there, fist means neutral. Engine, either put the engine in neutral if you're at the bow, or if you're at the helm, signal that you've gone into neutral by holding out a fist. Go forward is point forward, or hands, flap your hand forward, go forward, or go, that's port or starboard. And then reverse would be actually, the go backwards, please go backwards, go that way. So those are simple signals, and you do them big where they can be seen by somebody at the back of the boat. That's really important too. Very often there'll be like 5 people up on the bow dealing with the anchor, and one of them is up there pointing, and they're just pointing, I can't even do it because I'm not on screen enough. They're pointing, like down by their waist. I can't see that. the person on the helm can't see that. You've got to be way up in the air, but pointing in the direction of the anchor road. So keep that in mind if you're the one trying to signal, and look back to see if the person on the helm is looking at you, and hopefully that person on the helm will acknowledge, that, yes, I see you. I'm going that way. Don't keep yelling, go to starboard, go to starboard, go to starboard. If the wind is blowing really hard, it might be you just can't. And people on this call have been in that situation. The boat just won't turn. Sorry. All right. So anyway, hand signals. The position for relaying communication, again, as I said, midship when we're anchoring. And don't assume that what you said is what was heard. If you seem to have said, go starboard, and the boat's going port, you can kind of give a what the hell kind of look back toward the helm, but you might get the answer of, I can't help it. the wind is pushing me. So keep that in mind too. All right. So that's onboard communication. Now you got to talk to somebody who's not on your own boat. The VHF radio, every boat has one that we charter because they're legally required. Most of our skippers and some others, I think, also bring a handheld version, which you see pictured here. You do not need a license to use these radios in the US. I think you might need a license in some other countries, but we kind of just don't pay too much attention to that. And we bring them anyway and use them. The range of the smaller handheld version is about 5 miles. And it's because it's line of sight. So you can hold it up higher and get perhaps, another quarter of a mile, but then you can't actually talk into it. So doesn't help. The fixed radio, the antenna is on the top of the mast. So the range of that is between 20 and 25 miles on the typical boats we charter, because it depends again on the height of the mast. And it is, well, it says one-way communication. It's one at a time. If I'm talking and I'm holding the talk button, then I can't hear anything. And that's an important point I'll get to in a second. So it's one way in that sense. I don't know. Whatever. All right. So a typical handheld or typical VHF radio has a power switch. You got to figure out how to turn it on. The skipper on every charter, and the first mate too, I hope, looks at the radio and figures out what switch is which. Sometimes it's the volume knob that you turn to turn it on and then turn up the volume. Sometimes it's a separate button. You got to actually look at it to figure that out. They're not all the same. There's high and low, and that means how strong the signal is that you send out. So if you're anchored in a small harbor and your other boat is, 100 yards away, anchored as well, you put it on low. You don't want to be blasting for 5 miles your discussion of dinner and plans. So, think about high and low and which one you want to be on. And there's usually a button to switch between high and low. There's a channel selector, might be a knob on the boat's installed radio. It could be buttons with arrows. You push up and down arrows to go through the selection of channels. On a handheld, same thing. It could be buttons or it could be a knob. I'll get to what channels to use in a second. Was there, I heard a noise, but I thought it was just a cough.
I have a question. Do you want questions as you go, or do you want us to save them to the end?
Let me get through the content of the slide we're on and then jump in. If that works. And if you really just have to ask at the moment, then that's okay. It's not the end of the world. But that way, at least we can kind of pace it a little bit better. Every radio has a squelch. So there's volume and there's squelch. Squelch controls the receiver output. What the hell does that mean, right? So when you turn the radio on, if you hear, that means the squelch is too low. And if you turn the squelch up very carefully, very slowly, that will go away and you'll get just, no noise until a voice comes on and starts talking. So it's radio noise that squelch is squelching. So always be sure if you turn on a radio and there's no noise, No, you don't hear any voices. Check the squelch and make sure someone hasn't turned it all the way up so it's actually squelching everything. Turn it back down until you hear a little and turn it back up a tiny bit, back up a tiny bit after that, so you get rid of the noise. The microphone, hold it about an inch from your mouth. Don't hold it against your mouth like this. I got accused of that at some point years ago, which I don't know I was doing, but somebody said I was. Hold it a little way away from your mouth. Push the button to talk. Let it go if you want to hear anything. If you keep it pushed, if you grip it with a death grip and keep that side button pushed, you're stepping on everything else on that channel. Okay. Questions?
I mean, I had a question, it may be stupid, but are the channels worldwide? So if you're in a different country sailing, you still use the same channels?
Yeah, it's some, yes, but not necessarily all. And I think channels might be next, or they're soon. But 16 is pretty much universal as the emergency hailing channel. Other channels might vary. I had an experience with that in England, but that had to do with because there are US bands and international bands on some channels. So like, I think it was 21, there's a US 21 and an international 21, and they aren't the same. And my radio was on international 21 because I figured, okay, I'm in England, right? It was my handheld radio. I'm in England, so I must need to be on the international channel 21. It turned out, because I would hear the marinas were using that channel and I would hear them, they would call me and I would respond and they never heard me. Finally, once I somehow managed nonetheless to get into the marina and get into our slip, and I went into the office and, oh, it's because you're on international. No, it needs to be US channel 21. Switched it, and yeah, sure enough, who knew, right? I'm in England. Why would it be US? But it was. So yeah, you can run into challenges there. But it's not like there's legal ramifications for the most part that, oh God, don't use that channel because in this country it's it's illegal or something. At least not that I'm aware of. So when you're hailing a ship or a marina or fuel dock, a bridge, because we use it to ask bridge tenders to open bridges, you repeat the target name 3 times and conclude with over. Gary, Gary, Gary. This is Mia. Over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over means I'm done talking and it's your turn to talk. Out means I'm turning the radio off. Over and out is a contradiction. Never say over and out. I will laugh at you and pick on you if you do. You'll hear it all the time on TV and in movies, and it's just wrong. When you're done for now, but you're going to keep listening to the radio, what you say is, this is Mia. I'm standing by on channel 16, channel 68, whatever channel I'm going to leave the radio tuned to is what I say. And I'm using my own name just because I'm not on a boat right now. And the sailing club, we do typically use the names of the skippers because we can't remember the names of the boats that we've just gotten onto earlier today. We do sometimes use the boat names. And if you're going to a marina, for example, you would use the boat name because you've probably given the boat name to the marina. They've asked for it, you've had to give it to them, so you kind of got to remember to use the boat name. Saying, I'm coming in on Bright Star and, I'll be there in half an hour. But we use the skipper, generally last names, sometimes first names, when we're just, trying to reach each other to talk. And absolutely no cursing, no bad language, whatever the definition of bad is. Coast Guard will come on and, reprimand you if you do use foul language. I've heard it. Okay, the channels. These are certainly US, but also other countries we've been to that other than that US versus international fiasco. So channel 16 is for hailing, to make contact, and then you switch to another channel. Do not have a conversation on channel 16. The Coast Guard will come on and reprimand you if you do. It's definitely the channel you use if you're having an emergency. We'll get into a little more of that shortly. Don't do radio checks on channel 16. Do not pick up your radio, turn to channel 16 and go, radio check, I'm in Rock Hall. The answer you get will be, this is the U.S. Coast Guard Annapolis, and get off channel 16. Chesapeake Bay, there is a channel, I want to say it's 21 in the Chesapeake Bay, but I could be wrong, where you go there, and I'm not sure if it's up and running anymore, but it used to be an automated radio check. So you could go there and do radio check, and you would get your own voice recorded back to you, which confirmed to you that your message was received at the radio check base, which I can't remember offhand where it is. I want to say Annapolis. So, that was a really cool system that I'm not sure is still up. Channel 13 is how do you talk to bridges and locks and commercial vessels. So if there's a giant ship coming right at you, you want to call them and tell them, help, you're attacking me. They're going to say, get out of my way, I'm bigger than you. But anyway, you would call them on channel 13. It's kind of interesting to listen to channel 13. If you're in a heavy shipping area, you can hear the boats talking to each other, and they often will be talking about you if you're in their way. That sailboat up there just won't get out of the channel. Channel 22A is the one when you're on channel 16 and you hear some emergency happening, the Coast Guard will very often tell the boat, if there's a boat in distress, oh no, I'm sorry, it's not that. The Coast Guard will often come on channel 16 and announce, we have a notification to mariners, switch to channel 22A to hear the details. And you go to 22A and it'll be something about an obstruction somewhere or a special event or something like that. Actually, when it's an emergency, I can't recall. It seems like they tell people to go there as well if they're going to have a long conversation about an emergency. But in any case, if you're sailing along and listening to 16 and you hear the Coast Guard instructing somebody who's sinking to, switch to another channel, switch to that channel if you can hear what happens, right? I always do. And then, of course, they're too far away. You can't hear them anyway. Channels 1 through 7 are the weather channels. And there's 7 of them because some of them are stronger in some places than others. So, go down to channels 1 through 7 and flip through the selection there until you get a strong broadcast that's covering the area you're in. That's what I always do anyway. Somewhere in there's one that you're going to hear that's going to give you what you need. And they are just recorded weather forecasts. It's not a live person. Channel 9 is more and more becoming the channel to hail your boating friends. So, if you want to call the other boats in the sailing club fleet, using channel 9 to do that is better than using channel 16. But you still don't want to have a conversation on channel 9 because it's a hailing channel, not a conversational channel. So that's why on each trip, we pick a channel to use as our chatting channel. It's going to be 68, 69, 71, 72, or 78. Any of those are all recreational vessel channels, and we can use those to make dinner plans and, talk about each other and brag and lie about what we did today and how fast we were going. So what we usually do is do that hailing on channel 16 and then switch to our designated of the other channels, but we could also do it on 9. The reason we tend to do 16 is because you are supposed to monitor channel 16 so that if there's an emergency in your area, you are listening. And if you could possibly help whoever's in distress, you hear it. So we tend to monitor 16 and then switch to our high channel to have the conversation. All right, I'm gonna run out of time. I'm not watching the time, but I don't want to run too long. That's what it says. Exactly what I just said. Everything on here is exactly what I just said. Other than that last bullet, which is we do try to agree on a check-in schedule. Usually not hourly on the hour because everybody who's doing any kind of schedule is going to do that. So we will probably do on the half hour. And then we forget about it for most of the day, as you probably well know. But it's a good thing to try to do. What a skipper could do, and I've never, but I could, is designate somebody to be the stopwatch and to have a timer go off every hour at the appointed time to remind us to do the check-in. That wouldn't be a terrible thing to try to do that. So if it's an emergency, there's three kinds. There's a lot more than that, but in communication on the water, there are three kinds. There's a mayday, a pan, and a sécurité. I think we probably all know what mayday is. Imminent danger of loss of life or vessel. It does need to be that severe. And that means, we're taking on water. We can't stop it. We're on fire. Something that you really do feel that somebody could die. It also could be that we have a medical emergency on board that is very severe. And so it's not that the whole boat is in trouble, but we need help because there is the danger of loss of life. Hopefully we never need to use it. Pan is situation is difficult. It's possible there will be injury or loss of property, but it's not immediate death and it's not immediate loss of property. There's something going on that we want awareness because it could turn into a mayday. And what you might get if you broadcast a pan is, someone who's listening who's not too far from you might say, can I help? Do you want me to come to you and offer some kind of assistance? And, it totally depends on the situation, whether you do or not. You might be asking for a medical professional, and they might say, I'm a doctor and we're not far from you. I'll come. So that's a pan. And sécurité, you hear those kind of often. That's a navigational or weather situation. You'll hear it often because if you were near in the Chesapeake near Baltimore, for example, the large ships leaving docks to come out the river and into the bay, they announce a sécurité, this is the vessel, blah, 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 departing Baltimore, or they might name the particular shipyard, heading, down the outbound of the Patapsco River. They're just letting the world know they're coming and they're big and they don't maneuver very well. So be aware of them because you may need to get out of their way. That's a sécurité.
Hey, Mia.
Yes.
Would then a man overboard, they're not knocked out overboard, but they're off the ship, but generally be a pan?
You might, especially if weather conditions are kind of, rough and you're having a hard time collecting the person. You might do a pan because maybe someone nearby can kind of help retrieve the person. Generally, well, yeah, it really very well could. It could be a pan. It could turn into a mayday if you're not able to recover them quickly. Yeah.
But that would serve to flag the Coast Guard to kind of pay attention.
Yeah. That's a good point. Very good point.
If it was
I'll also
me,
point, yeah.
If it was me, anytime I got a person in the water, I'm calling a mayday. Because I would rather call a mayday and cancel it than to call a pan and not get the attention. If I've got a person in the water, I want help.
Yeah,
I can see that. Yep. It's all situational and it depends on your crew, capabilities, the equipment of your boat, but it's not wrong to call a mayday. I also just wanted to mention that the VHF radios, a lot of times now they have position data on the radio. I'm going to get a little further into what I mean by that, but the reason I thought of it here is just because often when you turn the radios on these days, they have the function to have position, but it's not connected on the charter boat. And after a few seconds, the radio will start to beep madly because it can't get the position data that it thinks it has to have. So you may discover that, you turn on the radio and it starts to beep and you don't know what to do. You got to read the screen and it'll say how to cancel the signal. But if it does work, then it's quite handy because it is if you do a Mayday or you do an emergency call on the radio, sometimes they have an emergency button that you actually press, and that transmits your position automatically. So that when you get in touch with the Coast Guard, they'll probably still ask you for your Latin long, but it's also being transmitted to them. So that's a handy thing to realize that the VHF radios do. Not all of them have it though. Yeah.
Mia, is this what you're just referring to? Is this the DSC, the digital select calling button, the DSC button?
I think so. You know, I'm just saying that I know that they transmit if you do an emergency, and I don't know if it's called DSC. I don't know if it's called that on all of them, but you know, some of them have that function, and it sends the position if it has the position. It might be called DSC. Yeah, you got to look at the radio closely and see what it, you know, what it says. So instead, you're going to use your cell phone. Well, first thing is you got to know what number you're in an emergency. So what phone number are you going to call? And if you call 911, I'm skipping down there. That last point, you know, just call 911. You're in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, call 911. We're in the US, right? Well, the cell tower that picks up your signal might not be the closest to you or the best one to get you services fastest. So you could be right in the middle of the bay and your call goes to the western shore, but the easiest place to you to get to with the boat, or the place where there's somebody who could come out on a boat, is on the eastern shore. But the operator who's going to get your 911 call, because it went to a western shore tower, is going to be somebody in some municipality over there on the western shore that may not even really know the layout of the bay. So always keep in mind, if you're using 911 with a cell phone, what tower it might have pinged, and you know, that may not be the best choice. Hopping back up to the top here. Yeah, obviously if you're not calling 911 and you want to call a specific place, you got to have the phone number. It is two-way communication, just like a VHF, right? You can talk and they can talk, and you can communicate immediately with one another. It is often easier, and I often use a cell phone to call the marina if I'm going to be arriving in a little bit, you know, let them know I'm coming, because the radio is sometimes just hard to hear. Calling fuel docks, same thing. Just use the phone because you know you're going to get to them. But it's only the individual on the phone who can hear, not anyone within range of the VHF radio's speaker. And the phones on speaker phones are usually not that great, not that clear, kind of hard to hear. Of course, the VHF can be as well, that somehow is better. So, you know, just use a phone judiciously. Most important, I think, is that under call for help on 911, in addition to the call possibly being routed, you know, to a place that's not the best, is that nobody else knows you're in trouble. Only you and whoever you called know you're in trouble. If you use the VHF radio, do a Mayday or a pon-pon, other boaters around you will hear you. And if you call the Coast Guard with a VHF, the Coast Guard will even say, you know, this boat in this location needs help. If you're nearby and can assist, please do. If you're on the phone, none of that can happen. So you may not get help as quickly if you're using the phone. So getting away from emergencies for a moment, I wanted to touch on other internet options just because we're seeing a bit more of that. We've been on a couple, especially Dream Yacht charters, where the charter company has asked us, do you have WhatsApp? And not just Dream Yacht, actually, now that I think about it, it's been others as well. You know, you get WhatsApp because that's how we communicate while you're out on charter. And you know, we'll give you the, you know, the handle of the manager, the charter manager, or whatever, you know, whoever the person is. So WhatsApp is very commonly used, especially more outside the US. And text messaging, send us a text, you know, and even Jackie at Haven Charters, you know, she'll look for a text on her cell phone. one thing that's, I think, probably good about that is it uses cellular data, not voice. You're not trying to hear a very difficult to hear phone call, but you got to have service. So if it's international, you got to have a international data plan. What I think a lot of us do that when we travel like that. You don't have to have a voice plan though, if you don't want to, although probably most people do. It is two-way asynchronous communication, right? So you can type a message, send a text message or do a message in WhatsApp, but you gotta, hope they get it. And when they get it, they'll respond. There's no immediate response. You don't know that they're actually paying attention to their phone to get the message until you hear back from them. So it's good for non-emergency contact. It's good for, contacting the charter company to tell them that you're having some issues and you're going to be coming back to base, but you don't need them to get that message this instant. Or whatever kind of message you might have for them. It's not so good for like calling the marina to say, I'm going to get there in half an hour, because you don't know if anyone's going to, see that within that half hour. So you want it more voice direct for that. My last category is satellite, which is not something that we've really touched on before, because satellite phones are expensive and the service is expensive, but it will work anywhere in the world. It's not a cell service. It's using satellites, right? And you can use it for text messaging and internet access even, if you want to spend the money on the service. But the sound quality can be poor. And I know that from experience, because when we went to Fort Jefferson, west of Key West, I rented one. I don't know if people know that, but I rented a satellite phone to take on that trip, because we're going to be outside of VHF radio range and no cellular coverage, and we'll have no way to communicate. So I'm going to rent a satellite phone. It was really just because I wanted to try one. So while we were out at Fort Jefferson, I called my niece, and the quality was pretty poor, but I did have a conversation over it with her to test it out. And fortunately we had no emergency, so it wasn't needed for an emergency. But another satellite option that is a growing thing are just emergency locator devices and services. If you have I'm hopping now down to the bottom, an iPhone 14, that newest model of iPhone comes with this, so that it doesn't use data, it doesn't use cellular data or the phone. It has a satellite receiver, or it can send to satellites. So it can send an emergency signal to responders. And you can even do text messaging on that with the responder. So you'll get a message saying, okay, message received, we're dispatching a helicopter, or a boat, whatever. Some of the Garmin GPSs, also some of the models have that sort of service built in. Other such devices that are just devices can send an emergency signal to authorities, and there are some that send automatic location messages to contacts. I think Bob Rainey might have one. I think he does when he goes on motorcycle adventures, just a device that is sending out every day a message to a contact list that he's defined to say, Bob's location is this. And if you were to have an emergency, you could do an emergency signal on it, but it is satellite, not cellular, and not dependent on a phone or a data plan. So it's an interesting growing area to consider. If you're going to be offshore, if you're going somewhere far, you might want to, EPIRB, well, right. EPIRB is another long time example of that. That is what that is, right, Gary?
It's an MOB1.
Okay.
And what this does, I don't know if you can see it, but what it does is it sends out a DSC and an AIS signal, so that the boats around and the Coast Guard know that you're in the water.
Right.
It attaches to my PFD.
Right.
And PFD explodes, or excuse me, when it inflates, it pulls this little lanyard and sets off the signal.
Right. It's not a bad thing to invest in, you know, it's a good idea. So consider those things just for your personal, for the most part, for personal. EPIRB though is what I said, which is the similar looking but larger device that's on boats that are going offshore, that when it gets wet, it activates, meaning the boat is flooded or, you know, overturned or sunk. It activates and also sends satellite signal with location so that it can be picked up by the Coast Guard. I think we've all seen those in movies, you know, activating and drawing the attention of the authorities. So things to consider for your personal safety, not so much the boat. And questions, how'd I do? Oh yeah, all right, well, ran a little bit longer than I intended. Any other questions? Discussion? Further sharing of adventure stories?
I have some, but I gotta finish. I just took a bite of my dinner.
Mia,
But Mia was,
Mia, can you perhaps go through an example for a Mayday call, like what you want to convey to the Coast Guard, the type of
Sure.
information?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that we had a couple more elaborate demos in this presentation, but I wanted to keep it short. So, Gary has his mouth full. Mark, you're sitting there, you're staring into space. Turn on your speaker, your microphone. So, and answer me. You be the Coast Guard. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is the vessel Mia, and we're sinking. Come on, Mark, be the Coast Guard.
This is Coast Guard Sector Baltimore. What is your present location and emergency?
Oh, Coast Guard Baltimore, we are taking on water. We seem to have hit a rock, and the bilge pump is malfunctioning. You know, so we are off of Love Point. We're a white sailboat with white sails.
I missed the first part of my conversation. Does everyone have a life jacket on?
Oh, stand by.
So I have learned that,
quick, get them out.
not through personal experience, but I have learned that that's the first thing they ask you every
It
time.
is. No, that's why I laughed.
Good catch, Mark.
So people say.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. That is the first thing they ask. And so, yes, everyone now has life jackets on. What's the next question? Mark, this is a quiz for you. I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. What's the next
That's
question they always ask?
How many persons are on board?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
How many persons on board, and adults versus children? They always ask that. So
And
you
off
know,
off of Love Point is too subjective. Yeah, need Latin knowledge.
thank you. Yes, they're going to ask for latitude and longitude. So you're going to, you know, I'm going to scramble to see what Latin long is, and I would give that to them. And then the numbers get garbled. You know, it's, but you repeat it 6 or 7 times. But that's the perfect example of why, if the radio is transmitting your location, they can get it from there. So usually that conversation might go on for a while, but the questions that you heard, is everyone wearing a life jacket? How many people are on board? And what, you know, what's the situation? Where are you? Those are the questions you're going to get asked. So if you're making the Mayday call, be prepared with that information. And the answer to life jackets needs to be yes. Everyone's wearing a life jacket. So, you know, even as you're picking up the radio, be telling people to put their life jackets on if they weren't already. Then Coast Guard might then say, let's switch to another channel because we're going to stay on with you. You also might hear CETO jumping in and saying, oh, I'm right there. And so the Coast Guard backs off at that point because CETO is a commercial venture that they have to allow to try to handle the rescue. So yeah.
One thing that you did cover, and I think you did it intentionally, is though you also want to have a more descriptive of your boat, a clearer.
Yeah, oh, yes.
And
I totally, yes. Wait,
Okay.
sailed. Yeah, I totally did that intentionally. Yes. You would give the boat name. You would give more specific details, although to a coastie, you could probably give it all kinds of detail and they wouldn't really know what that means. But yes, you do want to be a little more specific. Make of boat, certainly style, sloop versus ketch versus yawl. Anything you can provide. Yes.
Might they ask you if you have a manual sump pump?
I haven't heard them do too much. Well, they might if the conversation
Oh,
continues
because
for
we
a
can
bit.
get somebody to you, but it's not going to be for 15 minutes.
Yeah, right. So yeah, can you pump by hand or can you bail?
Can you
Yeah,
pump by
they
hand?
might. I've certainly heard the conversations go on a bit longer with exploring the possibilities, but it does depend on the scenario. Person in the
Or are
water,
you
different-
getting into the life raft as we speak? Because
Right,
you don't
right.
want to go down with the ship. Yeah.
Yeah, probably not the Chesapeake Bay. One of the things we I think are going to try to do at the on-water training, I don't know, Gary would know who here is participating in that, but we're going to try to do regular radio communication between the boats, among the boats on that trip.
Yay.
So, but more to the point, it's going to rotate. So if you're on one of those boats, you are going to need to talk on the radio. And, that's, I think, I see a lot of people, a lot of crew kind of get this deer in the headlights expression when, if I say, can you just go call, Bob's boat and ask them, what they're doing for dinner? There's fear of the radio. So we're going to press as many people as we can to, hold the microphone, push the button, talk on the radio, say over, say standing by, not swear, and realize that it's not going to bite. And when we're talking on a channel like 68, 69, the ones that are the quote chat channels, it's hard to piss anybody off. If you don't let go of the button, that'll piss people off. But otherwise, you can have a simple conversation and it's fine, not scary. So we're going to try to do that. I'm going to cycle through and have as many people as possible have to talk on the radio.
I would like to add a couple things. One is, especially when Mia was talking about onboard communications, if you get a request, then it helps to repeat that request. An example would be if the navigator says to the helmsman, come to a heading of 180, it helps if you are the helmsman to repeat that request.
Yep.
In other words, heading 180.
Yep.
That way, the person sending the request knows that you've received and understood the request that was sent.
Yeah, that's sort of the where I said, at least acknowledge having heard it, actually repeating it back, particularly something like a heading, something that's a fairly succinct, short statement. Repeating it back is an excellent way to be sure that you don't have to assume what was said is what was heard because you know it. Good point, Gary. Let's do something else. I think you said you had a couple.
Yeah, and the other thing was when Mia was talking about the buttons that are on the VHF radio, I'll hold mine up. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a red button right here that says distress.
Yeah.
And even the fixed radios, you're going to see that distress button.
Yeah.
Right. There we go.
They have that.
You're going to see that distress button. What happens when usually you have to flip the button up in order to press it, or you have to flip a lever up to depress it? What's going to happen when you depress that button and hold it? It's going to send a DSC signal to not only the Coast Guard, but also the boats around you.
Right.
To say, you're in trouble, right? Maybe you get a man overboard. Maybe you get a fire on board. That's the button you want to know about. And you're going to see something similar. Every radio is different, but you're going to see something similar on any fixed mount radio, most fixed mount radios that you find on the charter boats, unless they're really old.
Really old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gary, question. What is DSC signal?
Digital selective calling.
And that's, what, is that different from the normal radio frequency?
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah, this
goes-
is the
but it does-
emergency I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Yeah. I mentioned it.
But
way
it
back
does
here.
go over your VHF.
Right. So if the radio fails, it fails, but I think Hans is the one who mentioned it earlier when I was talking. Mark, you raised your hand.
Yes, question I had is, Gary, if you know, once you press the DSC button, does that disable your communications for any length of time?
I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
I thought I remember.
I'm
I thought I
not
remember
exactly
hearing-
sure, but I don't think so.
No, I thought I remember hearing somewhere that, oh, you know what? I'm just thinking back now. We had handhelds at work in our radio system. And I think we had an issue where, and that might have been just within our system, where we pushed the emergency button to alert somebody of our emergency, but then it also disabled our radio. And I think we had to turn our radio off and then back on again for it to reset.
Wow.
Well, that's the thing to do whenever something doesn't work, right? I'm not aware that happens,
Gauge
but
principle.
Yeah.
something to keep in mind if you think that you have a problem.
On this topic of clarity of communications, Gary, you reminded me something. When you're referring to the channels on a VHF, isn't it preferable to spell out the numbers? Go to channel 16 versus 16 or 78 instead of 78.
It is. It's just a bit clearer, particularly over the radio itself.
Yep.
Something else that you will hear a lot is you call somebody. I call, Rainy. This is McCroskey. He'll answer, this is Rainy on 16 or 16. And that's because he probably has the radio set up to scan. Or I'm sorry, it's the other way around, actually. I apologize. When he's calling, he'll say, this is Rainy on 16. And because he's assuming that whoever he's calling is scanning across multiple channels, and they'll hear the voice, they hear the message, but by the time they get to the radio has sequenced on through its cycle. So but they heard he was on 16, so they can tune it to 16. Okay. And that's something to keep in mind when you're calling. If you're calling for help, I don't know, if you're calling the Coast Guard, you're doing it on 16 and they know that. But if you're calling for some other purpose, it doesn't hurt to say what channel you're actually calling on, so that if they're on a scanner, they'll know where to find you when they try to respond to you.
Like coming into a fuel dock or whatever, if you're
radioing
in.
Yeah. Often marina, the marina guys might be switching between 16 and whatever their conversation channel is. And keep that in mind also, if you're calling them and you're probably you might be calling on 9. Very often they use 9, but they might be switching between 16 and 9 or something else and 9. So, it doesn't hurt to identify what channel you're calling on, and also just give them a minute and call again, because they might have actually switched to the other channel that they use to have a conversation, and they'll be back to their hailing channel as soon as they're done. Don't expect immediate response. There's no such thing as a busy signal on a VHF radio. Hans has his hand.
Yeah, maybe just one more comment, and maybe too technical and specific. It's with regards to the DSC, my understanding is that in order to activate that DSC functionality, the radio needs to be registered with a MMSI number. And usually a boat
Yeah.
radio is, because that also what links the boat and AIS. But if you have a handheld, just buying a handheld, I think you have to register that handheld with, or get an MMSI number for a handheld that's not connected to the boat.
You might be right. And in fact, actually, I've had boat radios, charter boat radios, that's exactly why they start beeping at me, because they are not registered. And they're beeping to remind me that I'm not registered. Please register me, because otherwise my emergency signal's not going to work. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
pushing,
know.
pushing the button then when you're not connected doesn't help.
Right. That's right. It can't hurt because maybe it is connected, but if you're getting on the actual monitor, the screen on the radio, it says not connected to MMSI or, not going to work, then you'll know that it's just not going to work. Because these charter boats, they don't necessarily, because it's an account, there's money involved for AIS. So they may not.
Yep.
If your own boat, you can have it.
You're right, Hans. I have an MMSI number for my fixed mounted radio and a different for my handheld.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Good point. What else?
So one more question. We talked about a Mayday communications. When should I call a Mayday?
When should you? Is that what you asked?
Right.
Imminent loss
Imminent danger
of life.
The moment
property.
you think that's likely. What?
Are
Somebody
you asking rhetorically, Gary?
Or loss of vessel.
Or loss of vessel?
Well,
Right.
loss of
And
property.
Property, yeah.
If
But that
if
doesn't
you
mean
think
a
you
hat
have
would
either one of those, I would make the call, because like the
Yeah.
commercial says, you can always cancel.
Right.
Same
Yeah,
time,
it's a judgment call. Did somebody just pass out? You probably want to do a Mayday. Because you don't know if it's a heart attack or they just, have didn't get enough sleep, and they fainted. So call a Mayday and start CPR. If you are in a situation where you're going to do CPR, you need to do CPR on a boat, well, don't call 911, put out a Mayday.
Yeah.
But do it. The moment you think the conditions of somebody require CPR or even some first aid where they are non-responsive, put out a Mayday.
And get on it, as we've learned.
Well, right. And right. Those of us who just did CPR training are
30 and 2.
30 and 2, right?
Gary, would you say, when in doubt, do the Mayday?
Yeah, that's Gary's.
I agree.
Yeah.
The worst thing that's gonna happen is that the Coast Guard's gonna put you on a timer to get back to you. Get you some advice and then put you on a timer to call back and say, okay, how you doing?
Right. I've heard that happen on the radio.
So it was mentioned in passing, but it is etiquette, or I don't know if it's mandatory to then cancel. So one really should cancel a Mayday. It's no longer a Mayday. And I think the same for a pan.
Yes, yes, because otherwise you might have CETO or somebody from Coast Guard come, find you and come buzzing up to render assistance that you don't need. And
Have assets
that's
tied up.
not effective.
You'll have safety assets tied up that maybe need.
That aren't right. Exactly. You don't want that. So yes, you should cancel. There should be resolution. You will hear when the Coast Guard has, I have heard this, when the Coast Guard's been working a case, they will at some point, very often come on and broadcast on channel 16 that, you know, the person in the water has been recovered. The situation is no longer an emergency. You know, if you can stand down, basically, they will announce it so that, you know, citizens who might have been thinking of going to help in the search or in the rescue know that there is no point. Yeah.
Oh, I do have another
That's another
one.
question. Sorry.
So
Go ahead.
Answers first. Answers first.
okay, one more point. So you hear a mayday from another boat, you monitor 16, and no one answers. What is your
Like
obligation?
the coach,
The Coast Guard does not answer. Let's say it's on a charter, it's sort of outside of US Coast Guard range. You have an
Render-
obligation to.
Your obligation to render assistance
yeah, without endangering yourself.
without making it worse. Right?
Which
But
gets-
sometimes,
you should-
we're not privy to that call. I know we've heard that on the radio, that people are calling, they have a problem, and you hear Coast Guard talking to them, and then I think what Mia said is they take it to channel 22A or something, so we don't know what happens. They get off.
No, you can-
16.
Well, you can go, I follow them very
Mhm.
often. I
Oh,
follow
okay, yeah,
what goes on.
yeah,
But I have in those situations heard another boat has come to help. I've certainly
Right.
heard that happening, and you know, and I've also heard the Coast Guard announce that the situation is now taken care of. You know, it's the Mayday is canceled, and they usually will actually do that on 16. They'll announce that on
Yes.
16. See,
but that
yeah,
also-
I've heard that,
But-
especially with
but if-
people in
but
the
if you-
water.
but that
If you
also
hear a
goes-
mayday call, no one answers, or the Coast Guard doesn't answer, you should relay that mayday call,
right?
Mm.
because you may be the only communication link between that boat that's called the mayday and the Coast Guard. So
Yeah,
it's,
that's right.
you should, I don't know if you're legally bound to do it, but you should relay that mayday call if no one answers.
Oh,
Right.
yes, Gary, as we learned over the weekend, you are legally obligated because that's the rendering of assistance that you must make.
That's true. That's true.
Okay?
The-
You do have a
The
legal
thing to keep in
obligation to
mind,
render
though,
assistance.
is, yeah, I think that's right. You may not be hearing, though, that they are getting answered, because whoever, they're far away and the Coast Guard is even further. So that your radio may not be picking up that they are actually getting answered. That's kind of unlikely, because the Coast Guard's transmitters are, you know, extremely powerful.
Yeah.
But keep that in mind too. You may then call the person and say, I heard your Mayday. You know, I'm not near you, but let me relay. And then I say, oh no, I've already, you know, I'm talking to somebody. So, you know, just
That's
be
key.
aware that can happen.
Now, the other thing, though, is to think about what that means on your boat and making sure that you and your crew, when you hear a mayday or a pon-pon, you're shutting up. You're basically now paying attention. This is something, until you know that you can't possibly render any assistance,
Mhm.
it would seem to me you want to have everybody focused that this is
Paying
a,
attention.
exactly.
Yeah.
And paying attention because some of the information you may need. To
Yeah.
Gary's point, if you're going
The
to
more,
forward the information on, you have to know what it is.
right, if more people hear it, then you're more likely to get it right, or 5 different versions, but but yes.